Hi, if you like this video, like and subscribe, and you can check out other episodes of After the Con right here on my YouTube channel, as well as several instructional videos and a few rants and critiques. Anyway, enjoy the show. And we are live on Facebook for episode 7 of After the Con. I have with me J.M. Frey and Rita Woods. Now, Kevin Eikenberry may or may not be joining us. We hope he can get here, but if not, I'm going to miss you, Kevin. So before we get started with our chatting, why don't we go around and tell everybody about yourselves and about what you're working on right now, and then we'll get into it. How about, since you are on the top left of my screen, J.M. Frey shall go first.
Sure. So my work is. Oh, I'm getting a weird echo. Is anyone? Oh, it's gone. Okay,
it's gone now. Yeah,
it's gone now. So my work, I write basically, I wouldn't say mainstream science fiction and fantasy. I write more along the lines of magical realism or literary fiction with a bit of a science fiction and fantasy twist to it. So my most popular and well-known book is, look at this, I had props ready and everything, is Triptych, which was named one of the best books of the year in 2011 by Publishers Weekly. And then my two most recent series have been The Untold Tale in the Accidental Turn series, which is a literary fiction epic fantasy quest where characters in an epic fantasy series discover that they're characters in an epic fantasy series and slip the confines of their epic fantasy series. And then I have this YA steampunk series, this Skylark saga, about a girl vigilante and her mystical semi-sentient rocket pack. What am I working on right now? Something about dragons and baristas and hoarding coffee beans, and I haven't really figured it out yet. But
like the hoarding coffee beans thing.
Yeah, I have just finished 2 major series, and I'm really ready to have a standalone now, please. So it's too much thinking. Series is too much thinking, too much planning. You can't see it, but this whole wall right here is a whiteboard, and it's absolutely covered in scribbles in my office. So that's kind of what I'm working on now, is a sort of standalone novel about dragons and settler culture. And yeah, I don't really know what it's about yet.
Great. All right, Rita, you're up.
So I had, my name's Rita Woods, and I had my debut novel, Remembrance, came out in January of this year. Paperback comes out in January of next year. And I write kind of historical fantasy, historical magical realism. And so what I'm working on now is a book of sort of set in between Washington, D.C. and the Gullah Sea Islands off the coast of South Carolina and Georgia, about people who have kind of powers to walk in dreams and manipulate people. So,
neato.
Cool.
Well, and of course, I'm Brian D. Anderson. My latest book is this right here, A Chorus of Fire, that came out this last month on the 11th. It's the second book in the Sorcerer's Song series that came out January 28th. Yes, both of them right at the beginning of the pandemic and in the middle of the pandemic. And right now I'm finishing up the final book of the Godling Chronicles sequel, and I'm working on the last book of the Veil and the last book of Akiri. So that's what I'm doing. All right, anyway, I'm so happy to have everybody here. And as you know, this is free discussion. You can talk about whatever you want. Now, I know Rita's a doctor. She's a physician in Chicago, of all places, where, oh my God, that must be, you know, because I see some of your posts online, and it's just like this constant slow stream of exhaustion that
does that come through? I try so hard to I am cheerful and happy. I want to die. I'm so tired.
How's the back of your ears? Are you all raw from the mask?
Yeah.
I got some
So the regular. Oh, there you go. Does that have your book on it? That's perfect. That is perfect. I gotta do that. That's
well,
perfect.
you can go on the Zazzle store, or there's a bunch of different ones, not just Zazzle. There's like a billion of these little stores you can do, and you can just make your own merchandise with your PDFs, and it's just, I mean.
Smart.
I mean,
I'm gonna do that. I love that. I mean, since you have to wear a mask anyway.
Yeah.
Why not? Why not represent?
Absolutely, absolutely.
That's what I figured. I was like, if I got to wear a mask anyway, I'm going to advertise.
Might as well be a walking advertisement.
And I have like 10 masks, one to match every outfit that I'm wearing.
I do too.
I have to go out.
Isn't it crazy though? We were just in the store yesterday, and we have the walls of these beautiful fashion masks, and I can hear myself going, "Oh, this is cute."
Yeah,
I thought that would be a thing.
Okay, it's really interesting because I have to say I lived in Japan for 2 years.
Okay.
And they've been wearing masks. Asian cultures have been wearing masks for decades because there's so many people, and it's such a community conscious culture. There are good things about that, and there are bad things about that. There's an idiom in Japanese that basically translates to the hammer that sticks out will get nailed down, the nail that sticks out will get hammered down. But people are so community conscious that the minute you're sick, the minute that you yourself are sick, you put a mask on, and you put a mask on.
Well, what a lot of it, and now correct me if I'm wrong, and I usually am. But a lot of it, and especially in China, had to do not so much with the viruses, because there are a lot of viruses that come out of the, they were saying because of the Wuhan, that lab and the whole conspiracy theory going on around that. I was like, well, that's where a lot of that stuff comes out of. So why wouldn't there be a lab there? That's of course where you would put a lab for research. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So a lot of it is.
But what I was saying is, unless I'm wrong, they were doing it way before that. A lot of it had to do with the amount of pollution, and it was also like as a filter to keep, because of air quality.
Yeah.
Because they had
when
so
I
many
was
coal
in Tokyo,
plants.
we would wear masks for air quality. But I lived in the middle of nowhere. I lived in the foothills of the southern island. And you wear a mask when you're sick out of courtesy for everyone else. So I had a couple of cute masks that I picked up at the convenience store while I was there because, I got the sniffles and you don't on the subway in Japan. You just don't do that. So the fact that everyone's kicking up a fuss here, I'm like, come on, guys, people on the other side of the planet have been doing this since the 50s. Just the mask on.
I tell you, one of the most shocking things I found out about Japan. I was like a Netflix or something, or YouTube or video or something like that. One of the documentaries that they have, that there is a city in Japan that's basically, it's like the city of the dead. It's these people who lost their jobs and lost their livelihoods, and people who just were too ashamed to go home or whatever. And there's like a couple million people living in this basically forgotten city, and it's like really spooky. I was like, man, that's
there's a lot of at least, and I don't want to speak to it because of course I'm not Japanese, but from the experience that I had living there's a lot of, again, that deep connection to community. And there's a lot of shame around letting the people around you down. And
people they interviewed, that's exactly what they were saying, that they were ashamed that they were unable to provide for their families anymore. And there's this whole, and like in China, there's this whole group of people that are undocumented because of the one child policy that they had and that's coming back to bite them now, because now there's more men than there are women and which is causing a lot of human trafficking, which is causing a lot of a higher suicide rate from men who that can't have a family because there's nobody there for them to have a family with.
Yeah.
And You know, it's like they didn't see down the line what this could cause. You know,
Yeah.
and there's a whole group of
And-
people because they didn't have documentation. They couldn't be documented because they went against the law. That are just they have no citizenry. They have no rights, no way to to do anything. They're just they're like undocumented immigrants here, except
Yeah.
they can't even go back to where they came from because they are where they came from.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They don't even have that as an option. If they get caught, it's not like they're going to go back to a horrible place, but at least somewhere. They're just stuck in this limbo life. It's awful, awful.
Yeah. I think some authors that you could definitely, if people were more interested in these sorts of topics, is the Canadian authors Eric Choi and Derwin Mack, if people wanted to read, if they're intrigued in this subject, because I think both of those authors are very, very talented.
I tell you, I like what Rita came up with a great premise. I love the Underground Railroad being an actual spirit, like her book Remembrance. Was it how many generations has it got? 3 generations. Starts out in Haiti, or start out in Haiti, and then goes to New Orleans, then New York.
It starts in pre-revolutionary, just at the cusp of the Haitian Revolution, which is 1791, and then goes to pre-Civil War, and then current day Cleveland.
Yeah. Well, what now? You got to tell JM, what do you prefer to be called? I'm terrible with that. What do you prefer to be called? Jess. Okay.
Okay. JM is what's on the books.
Your Highness.
It's also what's on my screen. So.
Your Highness.
I'll take Your Highness.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I prefer to be called Your Highness.
Yeah.
Royal Majesty.
Yeah.
But no, he said when Rita stood up at the SIBA convention, and I mean, I'm telling you, the way she presented that, I was like, I got to read this book. You know what I mean? It was such a great presentation. I've never been able to get that kind of thing right. Where I mean, somebody wants me to talk about my books, I'm like, I get this sudden chronic case of the stupids.
That's something that I always say to authors, because I run a workshop called Reading for Writers. And I am a professionally trained actor. I was a child actor. I'm now a voice actor. It's what I do for a living. And one of the things that I always say to writers is, as soon as you get your first book deal, go take some acting classes. Because inevitably, they're going to make you stand up and accept an award, or someone's going to say, what's your book about? And you're going to want techniques for memorizing your paragraph pitch or whatever. And you're going to want techniques to tell better stories. But most importantly, when you're reading your book at your book launch, there's nothing worse than an author who goes, once upon a time there was a I just
read the teaser that was printed on the back.
Yeah. You want to be able to read your book. So I always say, go find a community theater company, do a play with them, or go to your local university or your local college and see if you can enroll in one semester of theater techniques. Because I luckily, strangely, am friends with 2 other actors who are also authors. And when I see them speak about their work, or when the 3 of us are on a panel together, or when they're reading from their work, I can see a big difference between how engaged the audience is versus watching somebody with no theater training just reading from their books or answering questions at panels. Oh, where are we headed now? What's going on? I feel like I'm flying through space.
Oh.
And all I have behind me is my office.
We're at a party.
I got a green screen behind me.
Is that Shrek's house?
Yeah.
Now, Rita, I'm still trying to puzzle out how you came up with that idea, though. That was just so original to me. That the underground. So what was the Underground Railroad? How is it tied in?
So it's kind of funny. I always tell the story that I'm one of those people. Probably a lot of writers are, that everything you see, you read, you pick up to read. I mean, I'll read the back of a cereal box, the bottom of a menu, anywhere. I just read everything. And I was at this friend's house, and Brian's probably heard the story, and she had this book in her bathroom that was like, quantum mechanics for dummies or something. And so I'm reading this, trying to read this book, and I don't understand anything at all. It's supposed to be for dummies, but apparently it wasn't dumbed down enough, and I didn't understand what was happening. But there was this one thing that just stuck in my head, and I'm sure both of you have the same experience. There's this thing that happens, and then it just gets stuck, and you start working it, and it starts to turn into something. And they were talking about the concept that, when you're sitting on a train, and then there's a train next to you, and then one of them starts moving, and you have that really, strange and offsetting sensation of not knowing which train is moving. And they said, well, that's the part of quantum mechanics, that time and space are all relative. And that's the kernel of the thing that got stuck in my head is, God, what if you could manipulate that? What if you could, since it's all relative and not really finite, what if you could manipulate that? And then somehow, the concept of where would I place that? What would be one of the most interesting places and times to use that ability? And that's kind of where the Underground Railroad sort of leached into that idea.
Yeah, that's neat. And covering 3 generations, I've never done that. I've thought about it. Well, no, I take that back. With my sequel to the Goblin Chronicles, I'm covering the next generation. But to do it within the course of a single story, that just, I have a hard time because I'm a pantser, not so much a plotter. And
I am too.
I would have such a hard time keeping that all straight. And just the continuity errors that would naturally creep up that you would have to be aware of. Well, my editor Lindsay over at Tor, she would catch it, and if she didn't, my copy editor Dorothy Zamak, who's by the way fantastic. Hi, if either one of y'all are watching. But they catch most of my continuity errors. But you ever had somebody know your own work better than you did?
Yeah. But what you were saying about catching the errors, there's that great Neil Gaiman quote is, in the first draft, you write everything that happens in the story. In the second draft, you go back and make it look like it was supposed to be that way the whole time.
Yeah, right.
So, that's why I have the whiteboard wall and I have all the notes, so I can try to keep track of all of that as I used to be a pantser, and then I wrote big epic series, and now I'm kind of like a plantser. I wouldn't say I'm a plotter, but I'm definitely closer to a plotter than I used to be. But yeah, that's kind of what drafts are for. People kind of have this unrealistic expectation that writers write the perfect book immediately.
Oh man, if you ever took a look at any of my first drafts, you would wonder how in the hell I do this for a living. You would damn sure question. I've gone entire chapters with no action or dialogue tags, just the dialogue, and then go back behind it and place. But that was one of the hardest things I had to try to learn to do, was to write effective dialogue. For some people, it's easy, but for me, it wasn't. I had to learn how to do it. In the beginning, I remember I made such amateurish mistakes. I was I would avoid the word "said," which is about the stupidest thing you can do, and it's what creative writing teachers, they'll ruin somebody trying to make them not use ly and said. Sometimes adverbs are effective. You can't avoid them because it becomes obvious you're avoiding them. It becomes really obvious because 9 times out of 10, character just said it. And if you don't want a dialogue tag, I had to realize, I had to get into my head that conversations aren't static. As I'm sitting here talking to you, I'm waving my hands, I'm leaning forward, I'm leaning back. So I can in a conversation with 3 or more people, I can put the action of who's talking. Jim leaned forward, elbow resting lazily. I can use the adverb or whatever, and then period. Then the quotes that what he says. But it took me 2 books to get to where I was competent at that. And that, and I was terrible at info dumps in the beginning, and I was just lucky the strength of the story was good enough to kind of offset the amateur writing, you know.
Mm-hmm. And then you had an editor go through and.
Well, in the beginning, it took me a while to find a good editor. I finally settled on a guy named George Stratford, who he wrote action adventure and things like that. And he was also a copy editor for a big firm in the UK. I've been working with him for a long time now on the indie stuff. He'll go. I can hand him a second draft, and he knows my writing well enough to where he can go back and he knows what I would have done and just sort of fixes it to what I would have done if I'd have had time for a third or a fourth draft. So that's really convenient. Then I got Dorothy, and Dorothy, Dorothy Zamak is amazing. She has done work for Macmillan Educational. That's why they allowed her to come over and do the copy editing for the Sorcerer's Song series. But she created her own career. She goes around the country, like teaching. She writes textbooks and goes around the country, teaching teachers how. I mean, not around the country, around the world, and teaching teachers how to teach out of these books. And on the company dime, gets to go to all these exotic locations and some of them. And I'm not talking like major places like Paris, like little villages in South America that you've never heard of, that you would never be able to see otherwise. I'm like, that's
a job.
That's the job, right?
That's a job.
I want that job.
Yeah, right. But that job didn't exist. She actually created that as a job. So I'm like, that alone is impressive. Now, what I do compared to you being a physician in Chicago during a COVID crisis, oh my God. How are you even able to be conscious right now?
Yeah. It's crazy. It's crazy. It's a little better. So when the country first shut down, we had to go full virtual medicine. We were still going into the office, but we had to go full virtual medicine. And I hated it. It was awful. I think it's bad medicine. I mean, it is what it is, but it was bad medicine. You can't practice medicine that way.
How about that? Were y'all doing health visits that way?
Yeah, like those telehealth, we do like a Zoom visit for medicine. Now, when somebody's having a heart attack, that's really hard to tell on a Zoom call.
Yeah, my wife works for Mobile Infirmary Medical Group, and she's like the manager of family practice in a little town called Robertsdale, not far from where we live, and that's what they did the same thing, and the thing is, she's saying, I don't know if you're having this problem, but you got they don't want they have a little bitty waiting room, so they're having people, no, you stay in your car, you let us know when you're here, we'll call you and you can come in, and people aren't complaining about that, and I'm
they are or they're not? They
are.
Yeah.
They're like getting pissy about it, and I'm like, why are you complaining about sitting in your car, in your air-conditioned car with your radio? But you'll have people, they'll come into that office with COVID symptoms without calling first. And as soon as they leave, they got to wipe down everything shuts down. And I'm like, come on, it's not that hard. You got to call, if you got COVID symptoms, you call first so they can make the proper arrangements. Especially going to the hospital or to a family practice where you're going to have elderly people possibly there. You don't know who, that. Yeah, I understand it's not so dangerous for young people, but that we have a lot of old people.
We were all taught in kindergarten to follow the instructions. I don't understand why people, I had to go to my local clinic because, so Canada went into lockdown on March break. So basically the kids went out for March break and they never came back. And actually they're going back this Tuesday.
Okay.
None of us love. And right around then I had the third injection in a series of injections that I needed to get. And if I didn't, I'd have to start the whole thing again and then start paying all over again. So I was like, well, I guess I'm going to put my mask on and make an appointment and go get my $500 shot. And that's in Canada. So imagine how much it would cost for you guys. And I showed up and I followed all the rules, and everybody was being very polite and very conscious.
Well, it's Canada. Of course they're polite.
But when we're not, we're not. And there was this woman who, as I was leaving, came in around this back way, didn't follow any of the markers. Like, this is right at the beginning. This is the first week of lockdown. And she comes in, she doesn't have a mask. She's leaning around the shield to yell at the receptionist. And the receptionist is like, the doctor's not here. She's like, I just want to see the doctor. And the receptionist is like, he's literally not in the building. You can't just go back and see Dr. Wah. He's not there. And this woman was not paying attention to anything. And then the receptionist finally said, how did you even get in? And she said, I waited for somebody to go out the back door, opened it, and came in. So first off, she's dumb enough to do this. Second enough, she's dumb enough to admit it.
Stupid. It burns. It burns us, precious.
Yeah. And she said, why didn't you come to the front door? Because they wouldn't let me in because I didn't have an appointment.
Wow.
Well, you don't have an appointment now, sweetie.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, well, I do not understand the behavior of some people that, the inconsideration, and especially you yelling at a receptionist that has, all she's there to do is to answer the phones, make appointments, and take your information. If she goes by whatever her manager or depending on how the office is set up, her office manager or the doctor, she's going by whatever guidelines have set up for her. She has no control. If the doctor's not there, the doctor's not there. What do you want to pray and miracle the doctor into his office? What's going on here? I do not get the behavior. And I hear Elaine comes home every day and tells me stories about people just acting like complete tools.
You sometimes forget how unintelligent humans can actually be. And maybe it's because we're writers, but we have a great depth of emotional intelligence. And we have a great depth of understanding of motivation.
I just don't have intellectual intelligence. I'm a moron.
It doesn't matter if you have intellectual intelligence, you have emotional intelligence, or you can be a writer. And you sometimes forget that what we do for a living is a skill.
Oh yeah, well, come on. Everybody says, I'm going to write a book. I'm like, go ahead. You think it's that damn easy to sit there and formulate your thoughts into a narrative and a cohesive narrative that has a beginning, middle, and end that adheres to some sort of story structure. Then I love, and I'm sure you've both of you've run into this. The people, well, I want to write my life story. I'm like, okay, write your life story, but here's one. It would be a bestseller. I'm like, no. If you want to write a memoir and put it in and get some printer to put it in a leather-bound thing, get it edited so you can hand out to your kids, that's one thing. But yeah, I'm sure you lived an interesting life. We all have. Unless your last name is Clinton, Bush, or just somebody who's already famous, or you've done something singularly unique, like that guy that lived under the subway platform for 3 years or whatever, and then wrote about his experience. That's something singularly unique. Unless you're climbing K10 butt naked, you haven't done anything that everybody else is a lot of people are going to look at and say, well, so what? I did that. You have to, but the best thing I tell them to do is to take your story, fictionalize it, and write it based on your life experiences, because we all do that. We all, we all draw on, we draw on the stories that we've heard and the experiences that we've had. But nobody, oh no, mine's really unique. Okay, man, don't listen to me. Then the question comes out, would you write it? No.
An extremely unique life and very interesting things happen to you, but that doesn't make you a storyteller. You can have the most crazy, wild, out the box kind of life, but that still doesn't make you a storyteller. the reason stories resonate with people is because like you said, you're telling it in a way that's like, wow, it's a mystery, or it's an adventure, it's a drama. It has a beginning, a middle, and the end. It has a resolution, or it doesn't even have to be that unusual, but you're saying something that resonates with other people. I was just a suburban housewife, but in the mundaneness of it, I found humor, or I found a lesson, or I found something. But it has to touch you, like the Irma Bombeck kind of thing. She's not telling big stories, but she's telling the everyday in a way that kind
something
of
relatable. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, you have this big interesting thing that happened to you. Yeah, but you don't have a way of letting people into it that makes it sound very interesting. Because you can take something that's really interesting and make it so boring if you can't tell
or
it.
vice versa.
Oh,
You know
yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, well, okay. Look, to draw on television. Remember the series? Remember the show Cheers?
Yes. Yes.
It was just about a Boston bar.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But there was something about it that the way they would make these episodes and the way they would tell these stories, that people would see themselves in that in a way that, you know, I mean, and that's just a sitcom. I realize. But okay. Even look at the story
I'm
like
sorry,
The
I have
Hobbit.
to
The
interrupt.
Hobbit, there's
There's
nothing
no
especially
such
original about The Hobbit. I mean, I mean, come on, that story's been told a million times, but the way Tolkien told it, it is compelling. It drives you forward. It makes you interested in what happens next. And if you can do that, the chops, the skills that you can learn, you know, the actual how to frame dialogue, how to write a proper paragraph. If you just have a bare minimum of writing skill, you don't have to be Shakespeare, or you don't have to be Tolkien to write a good story.
He did.
But I'm telling you that, but with the storytelling is a born skill that's very hard to learn. I mean, look, when you got up at the SIBA thing and told everybody about remembrance, you could see the whole room was riveted. You know what I mean? You could actually see, because the way she knew exactly, Rita, she knew exactly what to say and how to present this in a way that made you very curious to read this book. And I told you that night, you need to record that, you doing that, and that should be your ad right there. You know? And I'm serious. I mean, how many, this was going on almost about a year ago, and I still remember that. I still remember it clearly. So that's, storytelling is a skill. I mean, but, is a talent. Writing is also a talent, but it's also a skill that can be learned, the mechanics of it. You can learn to, how to do it properly. Not just reading. Well, you don't even have to take classes. Just read a lot and pay attention to how other writers are doing it.
What were you going to say, Jess? You said you disagreed about?
There's no such thing as just a sitcom. I think sitcoms are kind of the hardest, because I'm also a screenwriter. It's one of the hardest kind of story to tell, because nothing can change. How many years have The Simpsons been on? And Bart Simpson is still in grade 3?
Still 9 years old, yeah.
So first off, and I said something else that I feel like I need to explain as well. But first off, that there's no just in front of a sitcom. That's some of the hardest writing in television, because you don't have an emotional arc that you can. It's not, the Umbrella Academy where Klaus goes from this to this.
Mm-hmm.
It's these guys doing the same thing. They're going to the bar and they're sitting in the same spot and they're drinking the same drink. And you have to make the audience tune in every week. You have to elevate the domestic to high art.
You know who I think was the best at that was MASH. During that era, I mean, because they could go from that emotionally gripping moments to, one of my favorite was when Henry Blake died, and you showing him in the operating room, and everybody's in doing their surgery, and Radar comes in and says that reads the report that his plane went down in the South China Sea or whatever, and you see everybody just pause for a second and then go back to work. It was just, I'm like, whoever wrote that, I'm like, my God,
It's the most difficult writing in television. It really is. And the other thing that I said, where I said Tolkien didn't tell a good story, I think he's a beautiful world builder, a wonderful language builder. I think The Hobbit was pretty good. It was
a children's book. People forget.
Yeah, it was great. Lord of the Rings is a textbook with no plot. I can appreciate Lord of the Rings, and maybe it's because I never had somebody read it to me as a child. I didn't even know Lord of the Rings existed until the films came out, and I tried to read the books, and it was just like, this is... I know the color of the grass, the history of Weathertop, and what kind of clouds are flying over their heads, but I have no concept of whether or not Samwise is hungry, if the ring is pulling on Frodo's neck, if Legolas thinks these children are hilarious. I had no connection.
Well, that's a criticism people level at the Lord of the Rings all the time. And what's important to remember is when it was written.
Yeah,
the Tolkien and who Tolkien was, where his passions were.
Yeah.
And
I can appreciate it for what it is.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I can admit I love Tolkien. He's the reason I fell in love with fantasy. I mean, but I can be realistic about what it is and what it's not.
Yeah.
I mean, Tolkien. One of the things that Tolkien, one of the ways he hurt some writers was everybody thought that if to write fantasy, that's how it had to be.
Yeah.
You had to write in that sort of deep, heavy prose to write fantasy.
With
and
the
to write
history and the
good
ruins
fantasy.
and the language.
It just wasn't true. I mean, if I had to write like that, I would not be a writer because, God, that would just... I mean, you're right, he does paint this beautiful picture with words, but God, it's just... There were times I'd read The Lord of the Rings and I would skip ahead. Because I just was either too tired or just didn't have it to wade through that heavy prose. And
I think that's one of the bonuses of having not only a fan but a beautiful storyteller like Peter Jackson do the adaptations, because Peter Jackson found that emotional resonance.
Well, but the story itself is a classic good versus evil story.
Yeah, but good only wins because evil trips.
Yeah. Well, that's okay.
It's satisfying. There's nothing wrong with that. It's satisfying. But when people always say, "Oh, Tolkien is it's the archetype of good versus evil," and it's like, yeah, but evil won. Don't forget that Frodo gave into the ring. Evil won.
I don't agree that he's the archetype of good versus evil. I think what Tolkien did was he's kind of the progenitor of modern fantasy, because you're not going to find a fantasy writer who wasn't either directly influenced by him or influenced by somebody who was. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Yeah. And believe it or not, he did a lot for foreign rights people don't know about. He because he wasn't getting money for the American publications. He went and asked people not to buy The Lord of the Rings, and they en masse did not, and they changed the international copyright laws because of him. Mm-hmm. So that was a really good thing he did. Yeah. He was a pretty interesting guy. I didn't like the movie they did about him because there didn't seem to be much conflict there. It was just hitting all the highlights. And, I mean...
For her, did you know that he had 3 friends and they're like, look at this parallel and look at that parallel. Beautifully acted. Very pretty.
Yeah, and then the situation with his wife was all wrong. He actually... it was a lot more British than that. What actually...
Yeah. Well, and I always find it really interesting when people use Tolkien as sort of like the and he totally was the progenitor of what we consider 20th and 21st century fantasy. I'm totally there with you. But when writers compare themselves to Tolkien, they're like, oh, I need to write a fantasy book that is that deep in the lore and that deep in the language and that deep in a map. And he, he wrote these books over this many years, and he was, prolific in a way that I just am not. You have to also remember that he was a heterosexual white man in a certain era who had a wife who managed his entire domestic life for him, nannies who raised his children. He didn't have to clean, he didn't have to cook, he didn't have to do anything except show up at the house and eat. And then on top of that, he deliberately mistaught his classes, so students would drop out of his classes, so he could use his class time to sit in his office and dream about dwarves. And even at school, he had a runner to go fetch tea for him, to go if he decided he was going to eat at the university that day. There was a boy, go get me a plate. And the kid would come.
Oh, sounds awesome.
Yeah. And this is something that a lot of people are not.
And that's why I had a kid, but it didn't work out.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like an ideal life, but when people come down
for him anyway,
the 21st century for saying, why can't I write like Tolkien? The answer is because literally all Tolkien did
was right.
That's all he did with his life. And I believe there was a story, it was it Ursula K. Le Guin or someone else who attended one of his storytelling classes or his English classes, and she was saying that or maybe it was Diana Wynne Jones. I feel like it was Diana Wynne Jones. And he would deliberately turn to the chalkboard and write very small and mumble. And students would drop his class out of frustration. And she was like the only one who didn't do it. She forced him to teach his whole semester and he hated her. And I believe, and then she went on to write like Howl's Moving Castle.
He's an iconic fantasy writer doesn't make him not also a dick.
Yeah.
Clearly.
You can be both. And that kind of goes to, can you separate the artist from the art?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, there's, okay, I remember Piers Anthony wrote a book that had like pedophilia in it or something like that, or it was like he got blacklisted for a long time.
Piers Anthony was the first fantasy. I have to.
But you know what? I still love A Spell for Chameleon. I still have fond memories of that. And you know, I mean, Hemingway was an asshole and a drunk. I mean, there was like, okay, yeah. I mean, yeah. These, you got to remember, these were just people. You know, I mean, what they created was something special, but they were just people with all the warts and the scars and the scabs that people have. Yeah. And I promise you, if somebody dug deep enough into my life, they come up with enough shit not to like me. You know what I mean? But I don't think I think that's true of almost everybody I've ever met. You know what I mean? If you dig deep enough, and if you're really determined enough to find out some bad shit about somebody, and then
but the difference is
does that detract from what they created? I mean, there's certain things that I won't do. There's certain places I won't go because of what somebody is. You know what I mean? But it has to be pretty fucking horrific. You know what I mean? Before I can no longer separate the art from the artist. You know what I mean? It has to be pretty fucking bad, man, because you know what I mean?
I think it has to be bad, or it has to be presenting a poor lesson in the book. Like Piers Anthony, I was about to say, I didn't grow up in a family of readers, so I discovered fantasy books on my own, and I discovered the very first fantasy book I ever read was Nightmare by Piers Anthony. And then I went back and read A Spell for Chameleon and the rest of the Xanth books, and I hit around book 30, and I got to that age where I was like, oh no, wait a minute. I don't like what this man is trying to teach me about my worth as a woman. Mm-hmm. And that's when I was like, okay, I can't.
Anthony, I couldn't tell you what that lesson might be. I mean, I remember 80s fantasy was very misogynistic, like Conan with the girl wrapped around his leg. And then people were all wondering, why don't girls like fantasy? Well, you know what I mean? Because you don't want to see every woman be a damsel in distress. I get that, you know, and every artist rendering is basically nerd porn. You know what I mean? You have, you know,
that's what this entire book is about. It's about being a woman.
Now I'm curious how Rita
world.
I'm curious how Rita got into fantasy.
You know, so I don't know that what I was reading was like it was high fantasy. I always was intrigued by kind of the magic realism kind of thing, like Beloved, the Gloria Naylor, Mama Day, and Bailey's Cafe, and those kind of things. I wasn't a huge Tolkien fan. I'm not the dragons and quests kind of thing. I really like the stuff that's more based in the workaday world. I like the idea that magic can exist as you wash the dishes, sort of idea, as opposed to I need to be strong and smart and brave and go on quests and save lives. You know, so I think that was more my introduction, was those type of books.
With more, you know, like the thing is, what I try to do is with my female characters, especially, is have people with genuine, real. They don't have to have some superpower in order to be awesome. One of the greatest, it is female, but to me, one of the greatest protagonists of all time in movies is Ridley from Aliens.
Oh, I love her. Yes, exactly.
She has no particular skills. I mean, other than being a scientist, she has no. You know, I mean, nothing uniquely special that you could not find in any woman her age, in her whatever, you know, in her profession. But she does these amazingly brave things. She does these amazing things and doesn't acquire any superpowers along the way. She works with the tools that she has, with the limitations that she has, and overcomes this incredibly horrific situation. I've always thought that by far she is one of the best examples of a protagonist in films, anyway.
Or the woman in Terminator, the first Terminator, where you know, she was, first of all, you know, she was buff. She was just this incredibly ripped female, which that appeals to me. She's like, look at her triceps, look at her biceps. And I think the thing that appeals, the kind of characters that appeal to me are the kind that they're thrust into a situation, they're just normal people, and something crazy happens, and they're like, they spend the whole first third of the movie going, what the hell? You know, I don't want, I just want to return this library book. I don't want to fight the alien, but.
Well, you know, one of the things I attempt to do is to, especially when I'm writing a female character, is that I try to be realistic about physicality. Try not to make everybody drop dead gorgeous. You know, well, at least in, you know, it's not. There's also, and I have done a couple of videos on how to write female characters if you're a guy, and not to. I don't say you can't sexualize somebody, because you absolutely can. Because and we do that if we're going to have romantic interest. There has to be some level of sexualization within the characters, but basic, and don't try to make them like, okay, if I were going to write a female warrior and she was fighting a 240-pound, 6'4" muscle-bound barbarian, I would have to be smart about the way I portray that fight, because I'm not going to have her go, unless there's some reason for a 130-pound woman to be stronger than a 240-pound man. She's going to have to beat him with her brains and her agility and her knowledge as a warrior. She's not just going to trade licks with the guy, because a 130-pound man wouldn't do that. So why would a 130-pound woman do that against a giant, you know, against a barbarian? And it's lazy writing to me when you see guys do that and then treat femininity at the same time like it's a weakness. And I hate that. I mean, because some of the most strongest women I've ever met in my life are very feminine. They do not treat their femininity as it's some sort of something that, you know, hinders them, or some sort of deficit. It's an advantage. It's a strength. And anyway, I was rambling. Sorry.
Well, Jess, you mentioned in passing the Umbrella Academy. I just started that. The first couple episodes I struggled with, but part of the attraction for me that I've stayed with is they seem like, well, with the exception of the drug addict, he's something else. But they, you know,
just wait till you get to the end of the season, because it's such a payoff.
It really is.
I decided to stick with it. Yeah, he's got some issues. But I like the fact that the characters are sort of, they're damaged people, you know, and it seems to center around. I'm just getting into the series where it's I'm sad. I was an abused child essentially, and this is how I'm managing it. It just so happens that I have the ability to appear in different dimensions, or it
They're
just
very
so
good
happens.
about dealing with with that type of abuse. They deal with that very well. That type of mental abuse that they suffer,
Yes,
Yeah.
they deal with
exactly.
that
And their
very
powers
well.
almost seem at least in the early parts, and I'm still very early days, but their powers almost seem secondary to them trying to find their way in the world. Just
Yeah.
yeah,
I think
I'm a
that's
movie star, but I'm going through this terrible divorce. And so you could almost take her powers away, and it's still a very intriguing, very poignant story. Or I don't fit in with my siblings, and I was always told that I wasn't worth anything. And I'm just this very sad violin teacher. And you could take that story and put it anywhere.
Mhm.
It just
You
so
know,
This is what
happens
I
they
was
have
saying about the
powers.
emotional resonance, right?
Yeah.
There's so much emotional. Yes, it's a science fiction story, and yes, it's about superpowered children growing up to be screwed up adults. That's what the story is. But the emotional
Yes.
resonance
well, I always
of
tell
each
people.
character's journey is what engages
Yes.
you and what makes you
Yes.
say, yes, Netflix, start the next episode.
Well, I always tell people
Yeah,
when
because I'm not even,
when
that isn't even their powers wasn't even the thing that drew me. It was interesting.
Yeah.
And that's like, oh, okay, I know that's going to be the key. But it was, wow, the big guy who lives on the moon. It was like, oh, honey, nobody likes you.
No, I always tell people that if you can take your story, that you say you come up with a story, you say it's in a fantasy world, right? If you can take the plot, the basic plot, and move it into another genre, and it's still a good story, you have
Yes.
something.
Yeah.
You have, I mean,
Characters as well.
I mean, that's why I always, a lot of
Absolutely.
times I'll use Battlestar Galactica as a good example of that, because it's not about all the spacey stuff. It's about the cast of characters. The spacey stuff
Yeah.
is just the backdrop. And
Yes.
and people like a good story. Yeah, there's some people that just are way into world building. I get that, and that's what's most important to them. But it's for most people, it's about the plot and the characters and whether or not it moves them and they connect to it. And if you can take a good story, make it a western, and it's still just as good, you probably got
One of the
something.
wonderful things about having grown up in the fan fiction community, because I started writing in 1991 while I was years old, for Dracula the series and Forever Night, and these other really Canadian shows that you've probably never heard of. But then Sailor Moon came along, and I was like, wow, way into Sailor Moon fan fiction. And I wrote fan fiction from 1991 all the way through to, well, I put out a fan fiction in 2015, just recently, but I was writing daily all the way through university and up into midway through my master's degree, when I got hit by a car and I had 6 weeks laid up with my knee in a cast. So I was like, well, I guess now's about that time to try writing that original novel that everyone says that I could be good at. Because I wouldn't say I was a big name fan in fandom, but people knew who I was and people anticipated my next story. So then I was like, let's see if I can translate that into writing original prose. And one of the great things that fan fiction trains you to do is to be able to take those characters and put them somewhere else. Yeah, I really love Stargate Atlantis. Let's do a coffee shop AU.
Yeah.
I've only ever done one thing like that. When you know who Russell Blake is?
No.
He wrote the Jet series, and he also co-authored with Clive Cussler a couple times.
Okay.
He had back when remember Kindle Worlds, they did away with it, but they would take
Yeah.
and Kindle Amazon wanted to do a Kindle Worlds with him, and so what he did is he got a bunch of his writer friends to write the first few ones, so it would actually be writers doing it instead of just lay people submitting their stories. And that's the only time I've ever done that. That was hard. That was hard for
Yeah.
me to.
And it was a great training exercise, because literally anything that you could learn in an MFA, I learned by going, I'm going to answer this competition prompt about de-aging these characters? How can I take these characters and make them the same character but 7 years old?
Yeah, I ended up cheating. I ended up cheating and wrote an original character and only used his main character as a passing note.
You wrote a Gary
but at the time, it kind of felt wrong to like write his character. I mean, I wrote it in his world with the way he had set it up, in the method that he had set it up. But I wrote a new character to live in this world and do something in this world.
Yeah.
And
and fan fiction also teaches you the ability to mimic tone, to mimic voice. Like if you're going to write a fan fiction set in ACD's Sherlock versus BBC's Sherlock, you want to make it sound like Doyle's writing, right? So you learn to mimic tone, you learn to mimic character, you learn to parse how dialogue is put together in this specific show or in this specific book series, and you learn how to mimic it. So then when you sit down to write your own book, you know, I was saying my first book, Triptych, I was like, okay, I want this to be irreverent and heartfelt like Stargate. Okay, let's get in that Stargate mindset, and as if I was writing more Stargate fan fiction. And then I wrote Triptych. And I think for people who, I want to be a writer, but I don't know where to start, read a bunch of fan fiction, go write a few, is what I always suggest.
Well, you know, I've tried some stuff like doing like flash fiction. That's actually flash fiction is how I came up with the Bard's Blade. Mark Lawrence, y'all know who Mark Lawrence is? Red Sister, Gray Sister. Anyway, he's a grimdark, and he one of his super fans put on a flash fiction contest, and I decided to give it a shot. I failed miserably. Again, another failure, because I couldn't keep it under 300 words no matter how hard I tried. And you know, I mean, because once I got it set in my head the way I wanted it to go, there was no way to put it into 300 words without it sounding like shit. And but the positive of that is, by the time I finished it, because it was based on a piece of art, fan art somebody had done, and you know, write something with these 2 words in it under 300 words based on what you're seeing in this picture. And by the end of it, though, I had the entire well, at least the baseline for the entire Sorcerer's Song series in my head. You know, what I wanted to do. So even though I failed,
you won.
Doing stuff like that does bear fruit. And I mean, people who are, especially if they're aspiring writers, they should do anything like that. Write fan fiction, write whatever, flash fiction, any kind of, you know, anything that gets you writing. Because you know, I mean, it takes a while to get your own voice. You know, I mean, mimicking somebody else's voice is hard enough. Figuring out how you write something and that where you're consistently, where somebody can read it and know that it's you writing it, that takes time. That takes a lot of practice. Because
was it Wayne Gretzky who said something about you need 10,000 hours on the ice before you can,
I think somebody
before you can even start to play hockey? You need 10,000 pages of crap before you have something worth publishing, you know?
Well, we are down to the last 2 minutes. I want everybody to go around one more time, and we'll go in reverse order this time, and tell about what your latest work and what you got coming and what you want everybody to know about. I do this twice, once at the beginning and once at the end in case somebody missed the beginning. And Rita, you go first this time.
All right, so I'm Rita Woods, and my debut novel, Remembrance, came out in January, paperback due in January of next year, and it's about a voodoo priestess who creates a stop on the Underground Railroad.
Awesome.
Me? All right. I am JM Frey, and you can find me at www.jmfrey, that's frey.net. And all of my books are available there. And I was reminded, I I don't know if you guys saw me looking down at my phone. Somebody messaged me as we were talking and was like, you have a book coming out this month. Maybe you should promote that. And I was like, oh yeah, I forgot. So The Woman Who Fell Through Time, which is a queer historical romance time travel story about a bisexual modern woman who falls back in time and accidentally begins to influence the author of the first lesbian kiss in British literature.
Oh, wow.
Ooh, that sounds
careful, she might erase it and set the queer movement back by decades, if not centuries. So that book is coming out kind of at the end of this month. I should be getting my, there they are right there. So my typesetting file literally just arrived. So that's what I'm doing for the rest of the evening, is verifying widows and orphans.
And you'll be able to, I will leave links for their websites in the description of this video, and you'll be able to catch this on YouTube. I upload all these shows to YouTube. You can catch this show and the 6 preceding shows as well. And of course, I'm Brian D. Anderson, and my latest book, A Chorus of Fire, this book 2 in the Sorcerer's Song, came out August 11th. And the audio version is coming out in November for some strange reason, but it is. And I want to thank again, I want to thank J.M. Frey, Rita Woods, and I had such a good time today. I thank you so much for being here. Sorry Kevin didn't make it, but hey, we had a great time anyway. And again, thank you both for showing up. And this has been After the Con, and we will see you next week.